Cubo, salutations, and a clenched fist salute, YouTube renegades. Welcome y bienvenidos once again to the one and only Outlaw News, the small 1,900 plus nobody platform on YouTube that tends to spray the YouTube yardo with the flair tip can of Krylon Glecha. I am your host, the YouTube Magonista, the Cyber Rebel, the Outlaw, the voice of the barrio, the voice of the vato loco, the voice of the voiceless. Que pasa, pinche cyber raza? I hope all is well today in cyber vato land, and everyone is here today either 113 or 114% fully fucking activated and strapped with their critical thinking beanies on extra tight, YouTube renegades. So, if you think you're suited and booted y piensan que vinieron hoy listos for acción, let's mount up, Outlaw Posse, and ride to the dark side of YouTube for a moment. Okay, YouTube renegades, your boy the Outlaw just wants to welcome everybody to the channel. I just want to let everybody know that today we're going to be talking about Megan's Law celebrity registered rapist, comic book cholo, Rene Boxer Enriquez, and his most recent interview that he did on some YouTube channel called the Soft White Underbelly, who specializes in interviewing former drug addicts. And that's very interesting because I personally never thought Rene Boxer Enriquez was ever a gangster. If you read his book and you read about his crimes, he's really nothing more than a habitual fucking dope fiend whose crimes were really committed for the benefit of staying high. But we'll get into all that shit. First, I want to take a moment to apologize to all you loyal Outlaw Posse, to my Outlaw Renegades, for my absence here on the YouTube Yarda. It's not by choice, not something I choose to do. For the past 2 years, I've been dealing with a medical condition which recently was diagnosed because I didn't want to go to the doctors like a fucking giant man baby. I recently was diagnosed with a condition that targets your skeletal and muscular tissue in your body. Basically, I get pains in my body, specifically my chest, shoulder, and arm and back, severely. I mean, especially with the cold weather, they really fucking hurt. In the summer, they don't hurt as much. But I can only describe it as I've been basically feeling for the last 2 years like I am having a heart attack every fucking day. There's some days where I'll go 2-3 days where I don't feel the pains, and some days where it's more mild. But for the past 2 days, I've literally been living with the pain and the anxiety of thinking I'm having heart attacks. It turned out to be, like I said, just some minor pains that I can control with physical therapy, some minor painkillers, some tropical medicine, and some good old marijuana, right? But I don't want to talk about my medical condition. And also, I've been having some personal problems in my personal life. That's why your boy the Outlaw really hasn't been dropping content. But I just want to let everybody know that I've been diagnosed and I know now how to treat my pains that I'm having. So I have that under control, so I'm not dealing with pain and the anxiety that comes along with that pain. And unlike other fools who will turn to fucking drugs to cope with it, your boy the Outlaw is a strong, disciplined guy. I don't need alcohol. I'm not going to fucking go to no opioids, right? And then start slamming heroin, right? Because I could start taking Oxycontin and all this bullshit. No. I won't take anything more than fucking aspirin, okay? And if I'm going to find something to cope with the pain, a good fucking fat blunt, an infused fat blunt from one of these medical clinics is more than enough to kill my pain. But anyways, YouTube renegades, I don't need no sympathy. I don't need no comments of anyone worrying about me. Your boy the Outlaw is a mentally strong and disciplined individual who's capable of handling any problems that come his way. Sometimes it just takes longer than others to get back on track. And your boy, the Outlaw, is back on track. So much so that I wanted to announce and let all you guys know, I know I mentioned this before, that your boy, the Outlaw, doesn't really have a safe place to go and be alone to drop content, right? Well, I've taken the time during this period of where I've been dealing with my pain and anxieties to build me a man cave, or as I like to call, a man cabin. So your boy, the Outlaw, now has a little quiet space, which is, I believe, sadly to say, 8 by 10, right? Which is very similar to a prison fucking cell. But I now have a quiet little place that I can sneak away, not be bothered, and drop content. And I have a quiet little place that helps inspire me to drop content, puts me in that thinking mood, puts me in a good vibe, helps to deal with anxiety and pain. So I just want to let you guys know I finally got a safe place where I can just sneak away and not be bothered. Every now and then I might be bothered, but unlike before where I'm in a noisy garage where I move in the chair, it makes noise. When my dogs drink water, it makes noise. I mean, it's just fucking ridiculous. But I must warn you, my safe space is partially soundproof. And from time to time, you might hear dogs barking, loud sounds of a homeless person pushing a shopping cart through my alley, or maybe a helicopter, or I live pretty close to the train tracks as well, so you might even hear the horn of a train. But what you probably will hear is a lot is dogs. I have 2 fucking massive dogs of my own. My neighbor runs a puppy mill where he's breeding 3 types of dogs. And at any given day, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, there is some unloved dog barking for attention over there. And then on the other side of my property, my new neighbors happen to have 2 pit bulls who love to come to the fence and start barking and agitating my dogs. And I'm literally maybe 5-10 feet away from that. So you might hear a dog barking from time to time, and I apologize. I will work on soundproofing my environment, my little quiet space. Excuse me, I'm kind of fighting off a cough. But bear with me. I don't have all the high-tech equipment, nor am I being financed by law enforcement like the snitch influencer community who have all the nice gadgets and all the soundproofing, all the good technology, right, to fucking be good podcasters. Your boy, the Outlaw, is a simple man. I have a $30 mic and a fucking cell phone, a $50 cell phone. That's all I need to destroy the snitch influencer community. I don't need anything else. Like back in the days, all you need is a pair of fucking some 99-cent store black gloves and a cheap Saturday night special, right, to put in that work. Your boy, the Outlaw, all I need is my little $30 black mic and my little $50 prepaid black cell phone to put in work on these snitch influencers. So with that out of the way, YouTube Renegades, I just want to give you a brief update on what's been going on with me. Again, I don't want no comments of support or anyone worrying about me or my concerns. Okay? If you want to leave a comment, leave a fucking clenched fist salute. And that's all I need. Because, like I said, your boy the Outlaw is extremely well disciplined, physically and mentally. And I'm capable. You guys hear it? You guys hear the train? Can you guys hear it? I'm literally probably like, a little bit over a mile away from the train tracks, and that's fucking pretty loud. When I was a kid growing up, I literally lived 8 houses from the train tracks. We used to our little hangout spot was to go to the train tracks, and we would go out there late at night, and when the train would go by late at night, and it was honking his horn, we'd fucking try out our little fucking 25s and 32s and all our little straps like fucking idiots, right? We would shoot at the train, hoping that the neighbors wouldn't hear, drowned out from the sound of the horn. But anyways, like I said, I just want to let you guys know where I've been and why I've kind of dropped off the radar for a little bit. But let's get back to the pig of irresistance today, YouTube Renegades, because we're about 10 minutes in, and we haven't begun to start roasting this fucking Megan's Law celebrity sex offender of both men and women. What? One comic book cholo, Renee Boxer Enriquez. How many of you Outlaw Renegades have seen his most recent interview that he did on the soft white underbelly? I believe it's like 2 days old now. I've seen a couple of fucking so-called reaction videos in which they basically just glamorize the fucking sexual predator of both men and women, right? But nobody really digs in deep and fucking roasts this fucking clown, right? No one really puts fucking Megan's Law celebrity rapist on blast the way he should be, right? And that's why your boy the Outlaw exists, because I'm the only one who's not indoctrinated. I used to be indoctrinated. Who's not brainwashed. I used to be brainwashed like everyone else to believe that Renee Boxer Enriquez was a highly intellectual, well-spoken, former gangster, only to realize that he's just really a highly manipulative con man and prison guru like one Michael Lynn Thompson, the alleged former high-ranking Aryan Brotherhood member, right? Everyone knows Michael Lynn Thompson, right? Remember? He is the individual who's well-groomed, highly intellectual, and well-spoken, just like Renee, registered rapist Enriquez, right? Who went on social media and exposed himself to be a highly manipulative, delusional, narcissistic psychopath who cannot help himself but to tell some extremely outrageous fantasies, prison boogeyman fantasies. Because Michael Lynn Thompson doesn't sell prison boogeyman fairy tales. This individual is in a league of his own. He sells prison boogeyman fantasies, right? And that's why I'm making this video, YouTube Renegades, because just like Michael Lynn Thompson exposed himself on social media to be a fucking narcissistic psychopath, manipulative, habitual liar, so did Megan's Law celebrity rapist Renee Boxer Enriquez in his most recent interview. Exposed himself to be a walking, talking PR puppet for law enforcement who was a habitual liar, manipulator, and frequently contradicting himself from previous statements that he's made. And that's why your boy the Outlaw had to make this, I guess, reaction video to expose how one comic book cholo, registered rapist of both men and women, Renee Boxer Enriquez, is really the cholo Michael Thompson, right? The Chicano Michael Thompson with cholo tattoos and 3 flowers. Because remember, just like Michael Lynn Thompson, he is a well-spoken, well-groomed, alleged intellectual, right? Alleged intellectual. Just like Michael Lynn Thompson presented himself, or how he was presented for years, only to discover that he was a habitual, manipulative con man and delusional liar. And that's what I'm going to kind of prove today, again, that registered rapist Renee Boxer Enriquez is exactly that. A narcissistic, psychopath, delusional, and intentionally manipulative liar who's a walking, talking contradiction of himself. So let me begin, because I have a few things I want to talk about. Now, I didn't script today's content. I just kind of made a brief little note in which I made some talking points on what I want to talk about. So if there's some pause or something in between, or maybe it sounds like I'm scripting my content, I assure you that it's 50% freestyle off of some talking points that I wrote down. I'm trying to learn some tips on how to become a better podcaster. And I notice when I format and make some notes on talking points, it really helps me out to formulate my content the way I want it to be. So please bear with me if you think I'm scripting my content. I assure you I am not. Now, so I want to begin by first pointing out, before I really kind of go into the interview, pointing out the similarities between Michael Lynn Thompson and one Megan's Law celebrity rapist, Renee Boxer Enriquez. Now, I already told you, just like Boxer Enriquez, Michael Thompson is presented as a well-spoken intellectual, right? Who tells prison boogeyman fantasies, right? But you also have to remember that Michael Lynn Thompson, just like Boxer, the rapist Enriquez, paints himself to be a former high-ranking member of his former prison boogeyman gang. And just like Boxer Enriquez does, Michael Lynn Thompson paints himself out to be a pivotal individual in the rise to power of these organizations, just like Boxer Enriquez, right? Let me point out a few things about Michael Lynn Thompson that you can kind of compare to how Renee Boxer Enriquez paints himself out to be. Michael Lynn Thompson claims to be a former high-ranking member of the Aryan Brotherhood, right, who played a pivotal role in establishing the Aryan Brotherhood's illegal banks, policies, and rules and regulations amongst the group, right? He claims that he was always the sidekick, right? The lackey, the lapdog of the heavy hitters, right? Barry Mills, he was always there, right? He was always there at the most pivotal points of the Aryan Brotherhood's rise to power, right? According to him, he's the individual who brought into the fold of the Aryan Brotherhood to help in their criminal activities several members of the Manson family. Now, let me point something out, you two renegades. Michael Lynn Thompson didn't enter the prison system. He wasn't arrested till 1974, and most likely didn't enter the prison system till 1975. Now, according to William Hankins, who testified in 1973, right, several years before Michael Lynn Thompson entered the prison system, claimed that there was already an established alliance between members of the Manson family, specifically 3 of the Manson family girls, and the Aryan Brotherhood. So his delusional fantasy of being the individual who established a relationship between the Manson family is all bullshit. Because according to William Hankins, who testified several years prior to Michael Lynn Thompson's arrest and prior to him ever entering the prison system and joining the Aryan Brotherhood, there was already a relationship between them as early as 1971. Now, I also want to point out, like I told you, how he claims to be at every major moment in the rise to power of the Aryan Brotherhood, right? He established all the banks, and according to him, okay, this is according to him, which has never been corroborated, the alleged Aryan Brotherhood, according to him and the FBI, by 1978 or 79, was pulling over some wild delusional number, I think was like $500,000 from Folsom Prison alone. Okay? Now, you've heard me say this plenty of times, YouTube renegades. And like I've said before, these alleged prison boogeyman gangs have existed for close to 60 years, right? And in 60 years, law enforcement has seized, confiscated, and used to convict prison boogeyman gang leaders 0 times any bank account. Never have they ever confiscated, seized, or used to charge an inmate account which possessed illegal funds of any prison boogeyman gang leader, regardless of race or group. Yet, Michael Lynn Thompson goes on national TV and social media and tells you that the Aryan Brotherhood was pulling some delusional number like $500,000 a year from Folsom Prison alone. Okay? Remember, he always paints himself out to be a very important, pivotal individual, just like Renee Boxer Enriquez, right? Who played a pivotal role in the rise to power of the Mexican Mafia. And I'm not joking, because in his interview, if you pay attention, he basically paints himself out to be like a pivotal, instrumental, and influential member of the Mexican Mafia, that without him being there, that organization would have never rose to power and wealth. He goes as far, and I want you guys to pay attention throughout this whole interview, how he overtly and subconsciously makes fun of, mocks, and ridicules his former organization. It's very important to point that out. This individual in his interview goes on as far as to say that up until when he and a few others who would be considered the Pepsi generation, who established the influence and wealth of the Mexican Mafia, that the Mexican Mafia wasn't using its influence or flexing its power to generate money, right? That they were begging people for stuff for their canteens, that they were walking around with holes in their shoes and broke with no money in their accounts. This is what he says. This is what he says. That up until when he joined the organization, the Mexican Mafia was basically broke. And that they were just really just a bunch of cholos who just were getting high all the time, right? That it wasn't until he joined that all of a sudden wealth and power was behested upon the Mexican Mafia. Now, I just want to point something out, YouTube renegades. There is another individual, right, who hides behind the Bible and religion. An individual who I like to refer to as MK Ultra, test dummy, and programmed serial killer, Mundo Mendoza, who is been around a lot longer than Boxer Enriquez. And if any of you guys can remember the wonderful prison boogeyman fairy tales that programmed serial killer and one-time CIA MK Ultra test dummy Mundo Mendoza tells, of how he and Joe Morgan in the mid-70s established the Mexican Mafia's drug operations on the street and brought the Mexican Mafia to power and wealth, right? That he, Joe Morgan, Sailor Boy, and Alfie Sosa, and Champ Reynoso, and a few other individuals that he likes to name off, are the individuals who instrumental in establishing the Mexican Mafia's drug operation, which generated them large sums of money in the mid-70s. Yet, here we have in 2024, going to be 2025, Rene Boxer Enriquez claiming that the Mexican Mafia was broke and didn't have shit up until when he joined in the late 80s, right? And that in the 90s, they established the Mexican Mafia's wealth and power. Now, like I told you, this guy is a walking, talking contradiction of himself. Because he paints himself out at every chance he can to be like this fucking highly intellectual individual that's instrumental in establishing the Mexican Mafia's wealth and power. That if without him, the Mexican Mafia would never be what they are. When in fact, there is another snitch influencer that I would consider probably just as equally famous and credible, if you believe their lies, that claims that he and Joe Morgan established the power and wealth of the Mexican Mafia in the mid-70s, right? But while we're on the subject of the white savior of the Chicano race, right, according to law enforcement, Joe Snitch Morgan, and we're on that subject, I also want to talk about another thing he said in this video regarding Joe Morgan. Now this idiot, this narcissistic psychopath, registered rapist, and known sexual predator of both men and women, Rene Boxer Enriquez, tells this wonderful prison boogeyman fantasy of how he was disrespected by Joe Morgan at Pelican Bay. How he was embarrassed and degraded by Joe Morgan, so much so that he lost all respect for Joe Morgan and had a low-key hatred and anger towards Joe Morgan. Now, That's very interesting that all of a sudden now in 2024, soon to be 2025, he realizes that Joe Morgan, that he didn't like Joe Morgan, he had no respect for Joe Morgan, right? Basically what he does is subconsciously belittle Joe Morgan's character, right? Now, that's cool, because we all know I don't like the fucking Joe Morgan. I don't like him at all, right? 113 and 114% think he's a piece of trash. I think he's a cancer to the raza. I think he's the downfall of raza. Urban raza. Okay? Just like our grandparents who kneel down every Sunday to a blue-eyed God, right? Us criminals in the underworld kneel down and bow to a blue-eyed non-Chicano as our patron saint of criminality, right? Our Malverde isn't even Mexican. At least the cartels worship an individual who's Mexican, unlike us in America who bow down to a guy who's not even Chicano. But that's not our fault. We are indoctrinated to believe that bullshit. But anyways, this individual belittles Joe Morgan and tells this wonderful story of how Joe Morgan's basically really had no authority, and how a lot of people didn't like him and he didn't really have respect, and how Fox Enriquez didn't respect him at all. Now, I want to remind you that in 2009, so that's at about 15 years ago, this individual, the sexual predator of both men and women, wrote a best-selling, overrated, coffee book paperweight comic book called The Black Hand. And in this fucking overrated paperweight of a comic book, he spent the entire time, anytime he brings up Joe Morgan, praising him and glorifying and glamorizing him as some iconic gangster who's instrumental, like him, in the rise and power of the Mexican Mafia. Yet, almost 15 years later, he remembers this wonderful story that it was embedded in him very early in his prison career about Joe Morgan. So why did he leave that story out of his book? Right? Conveniently forgot to leave the story of how he had no respect for Joe Morgan in his book, right? Just like how he conveniently left out that he entered prison on a charge of sexual assault, meaning forcible sodomy on a woman, right? Or he participated in the gang rape of a young woman. Right? How he leaves that out. And he also leaves out his, obviously, new prison boogeyman fantasy of how he didn't like Joe Morgan. I just wanted to point that out. How this dude is walking, talking contradiction of himself. His best-selling book spends the entire time glamorizing Joe Morgan. And now all of a sudden he remembers that Joe Morgan was trash. Right? That he had no respect for him. See, just like Michael Lynn Thompson makes up delusional fantasies of taking on the entire Black Gorilla family and Nuestra Familia single-handedly, right? Renee, registered rapist Enriquez, does the same thing and just makes up delusional prison fantasies that suit him to sell his well-spoken and well-articulated delusional prison fantasies to his loyal prison genre fanboy groupies. Now I want to point out another part in his infamous recent interview where he completely does a 360 contradicting previous statements that he's made before, right? Like I said, he makes up stories as he goes along in order to sell his persona of a highly intellectual, well-spoken, and articulate former heroin addict. Which in reality, I guarantee you this motherfucker's still probably doing heroin. Probably not as much because he's being under control by his handlers. But when they're not around, I get you, the first thing this motherfucker's doing is shooting up heroin. Okay? Because that's what he is. A fucking dope fiend sexual predator. He's not a gangster. He's not highly intellectual. He's not wealthy. He's not sophisticated. He's nothing more than a petty fucking thug with tattoos who's a fucking dope fiend, right? He puts it down for his habit, not his hood. He put in work for his drug habit, okay? For the rock, not the block, right? Let's just be real with that. This motherfucker has never put in any work as a gangster, only as a dope fiend. But speaking of dope, I want to talk about this other segment in this video in which he talks about the relationship between the drug cartels and the Mexican mafia. He goes on to tell this wonderful prison boogeyman fantasy of how there's a working relationship between the drug cartels and the Mexican mafia have an agreement where they don't politic on each other's turf, right? Blah, blah, blah. All this wonderful fucking story that almost sounds like a perfect script for American Me Part 2 or Blood In, Blood Out Part 2, right? Some fucking Hollywood delusional fantasy story. Now, again, I want to refer to this fucking sexual predator of both men and women, Renee Boxer, the rapist Enriquez, is overrated, best-selling comic book, Black Hand, in which he has an entire chapter where he talks about the relationship between the drug cartels and the Mexican mafia. He goes as far as to talk about a specific incident in which he met with an alleged fellow Mexican mafia member, right, Bat Marquez, in which Bat Marquez offered him and the Mexican mafia a key to the drug cartels, meaning offering the Mexican mafia an unlimited supply of drugs for the drug cartels so they could sell using their network of gangsters. Because remember, according to the prison boogeyman fantasy legend, that these prison boogeyman gangs control every fucking criminal out in free society. Okay? The delusional fantasy of these individuals. So, if you guys remember the book like I remember the book, in the book, he clearly states turning down the offer from Bat Marquez and claiming the reason why is because the Mexican mafia feared the type of violence that cartels usually enforce. That basically claiming that the Mexican mafia wasn't sophisticated enough to function at the level of drug cartels. That they're only capable of moving maybe a couple pounds of methamphetamines or heroin or drugs, but not capable of moving metric tons. That the fear of being given so much drugs and not being able to fulfill their agreement with the cartels, that they basically would fear the retribution from the cartels. That's basically what he says in his book. Yet, 15 years later, right, now all of a sudden he talks about how the Mexican mafia is sophisticated enough to function at the level of the cartels and how they're generating millions of dollars, right, with the alliance that they have with the cartels, which he never provides any evidence to prove the fact that there is some sort of alliance between drug cartels and prison boogeyman gangs. So, if you, my Loyola posse, allow me to jump off of the subject and give a good example of how individuals like registered rapists, Renee Boxer Enriquez, and the snitch influencers use fake prison boogeyman stories to sell the illusion of some sort of alliance between prison boogeyman gangs and drug cartels. Now, you all remember, right, that massacre, right, that happened in Tulare County? Shit, I forget. I did the video on it, right? The one where allegedly the Norteños went in order to hit on the alleged Sureños, right, who were selling drugs for the Mexican mafia, who was supplied from the drug cartels, right, who in reality turned out to be not Nuestra Familia, but actually some fucking northern dropout who went over to the house, right, and murdered the family of the individuals who had testified against him previously. So basically, that crime was a rat-on-rat killing, which ended up going haywire and killing innocent people, right? That's one delusional prison boogeyman fairy tale that they use to sell the illusion that there's some alliance between the prison boogeyman gangs and the drug cartels. Another one I'll give you, and I want to refer to a specific article and video that was done by the Los Angeles Times recently on an informant, a former Mexican mafia informant by the name of Ralph Perico Rocha. The Los Angeles Times, along with the prison snitch influencer community, will sell you the illusion that there's some alliance between the alleged La Familia Michoacana, right, the Mexican drug cartel, and the Mexican mafia, right? They try to tell you the illusion that in 2013 or whatever it was that they were arrested, and that they found that there was an alliance between the La Familia Michoacana, whatever bullshit, right? Well, the Los Angeles Times went as far as to making this recent wonderful article and video to glamorize the informant who worked that case, Ralph Perico Rocha. Now, let me tell you about Ralph Perico Rocha and the alleged case between La Familia and the alleged members of the Mexican Mafia. That case was dismissed recently by a federal judge, dismissed the case, right, threw out the charges against the alleged Mexican Mafia members and the charges against the so-called alleged members of La Familia Michoacana, claiming that the government corruption, specifically the informant Ralph Perico Rocha's underhanded tactics in basically manufacturing the entire crime, right, led a judge to dismiss the case. Now, the Los Angeles Times, nor Boxer, the rapist Enriquez, nor MK Ultra test dummy Mundo Mendoza, or any of the snitch influencers will ever tell you that that case, when it went to court, was dismissed by a federal judge because the judge found that the informant fabricated the entire case. And that could easily be proven to be true because, and I encourage you to go Google Los Angeles Times, Ralph Perico Rocha, and see the video and article that they did on this individual, in which they glamorize this individual to be a wonderful informant. And in this video, they used audio, or was it, they used surveillance audio from recordings that they had made during the case in order to sell the prison boogeyman fantasy that they wanted you to believe. And in this video that the Los Angeles Times did, they played several clips of those audio recordings. And it's very interesting to when you listen to the recordings, because those clip recordings, on those clip recordings, you only hear Ralph Perico Rocha talking criminal activity. There is no other validated members of the Mexican Mafia at all speaking any criminal activity on any of those audio surveillance tapes, except for the informant, who has to be talking criminal shit because he's trying to fabricate a case. So, right? So just like when the informant calls you and tells you, hey, I want to buy some cocaine, right? Instead of calling you up, hey, I want to come through and get that thing, right? No. They have to be clear. So the audio surveillance gets it, and they have to say specific amounts of money or specific drugs or specific crimes. So I find it very interesting that the Los Angeles Times and law enforcement can't provide any actual audio surveillance of any validated prison boogeyman gang leaders talking criminal activities with other members of La Familia Michoacana, except for an informant, Ralph Perico Rocha, who not only acted as the ambassador, right, to La Familia Michoacana, but also pretended to be the individual that was a high-ranking member of La Familia Michoacana. Okay, I'm not joking. This idiot, okay, pretended to be the high-ranking member who was funneling money to people, and he was also the alleged Mexican Mafia member that was collecting the money and putting it in bank accounts to create the illusion that money was being collected and being put in accounts. Well, anyways, okay, These are the stories that these individuals use to sell the illusion that there's some alliance between drug cartels and prison boogeyman gangs, when in reality, they cannot provide one shred of evidence that there is some working alliance. Okay, they cannot provide no seized assets, right? But they'll tell you that there's millions of dollars flowing every day into prison. So if you know, that means law enforcement knows. And why isn't law enforcement doing anything to seize these assets and convict individuals? Because like law enforcement, and I know that these snitch influencers just tell prison boogeyman fantasies. Just like the one Renee Boxer, the rapist Enriquez, tells about the alleged alliance between drug cartels, right? This individual is a delusional, narcissistic psychopath, just like Michael Lynn Thompson. And he'll say anything for the bag and to sell himself as some goody-goody reformed heroin addict. When he's far from that, right? Because if he was really reformed and he was really on the straight and narrow path, he wouldn't have to resort to manipulating, to lying, to basically brainwashing people to believe prison boogeyman fantasies. Do you think Jesus Christ had to manipulate? Do you think he had to lie and brainwash individuals to walk a righteous path? I don't think so. But yet, this so-called man who's allegedly found religion, right, who doesn't need to go to church but has found God, sees fit to lie and manipulate free society in order to sell his fake persona, right, of an intellectual, well-spoken sexual predator of both men and women. Okay, now, this is the last topic I want to touch on regarding registered rapist Renee Boxer and Enriquez's recent interview on the Soft White Underbelly. He's asked a question by the interviewer, who, again, I will remind you, never once asked him about his sexual assault crime that he committed in prison, never asked while he was in protective custody and working with law enforcement, never asked him about the dirty test that he gave while he was in protective custody working with law enforcement for being on heroin. He never asked him about the two charges that he got caught within years of cooperating with law enforcement for attempting to smuggle drugs into a protective custody prison, right? In order to sell, right? The interviewer never asked him about his being incarcerated on a gang rape charge, right? But the interviewer did ask him a question that I thought was very interesting, and specifically on how he answered it. Renee Boxer Enriquez answered it, I'm sorry. The interviewer asked him if he thought law enforcement was doing a great job at combating prison gangs, specifically the Mexican Mafia. And he went on about a 5-minute rant on how wonderful of a job the law enforcement was doing. And this is where I talk about, you pay attention, he basically starts trashing, belittling, and disrespecting his former gang and laughing and mocking, claiming of what they've become. That they have become a sham of their former self. Basically, it's what he paints this group out to be. And how law enforcement has done a wonderful job at crippling them and basically has them like a tamed puppy dog, right? He goes on to commend law enforcement on what a great job they're doing in combating his former group. That they're nowhere near the level they were that when he was in the organization. Again, subconsciously painting himself to be a pivotal, instrumental, and influential member of that organization. Just like Michael Lynn Thompson, right? And I got nothing against his comment. I'm not even going to disagree with his comments, because I think law enforcement is the individuals who are behind these prison boogeyman fairy tales, right? You know, they know that these individuals don't have money in their bank accounts. They know that these alleged snitch influencers who all claim to be tax collectors and heavy hitters for these organizations are all lying about these millions of dollars that these individuals possess. And I've said this before, YouTube renegades. Do you think that law enforcement would allow itself to be a laughing stock? Because I really want you to think about this. That if true, that there's prison organizations that are running multi-million-dollar criminal operations from highly sophisticated security, maximum security prison cells, right? What the fuck is the purpose of law enforcement? What is our taxpayers' money going for? And what are they doing? We should seriously question what's being done with our money, because millions of dollars are spent to combat these alleged groups, right? And if they're not doing their job, then what the fuck? Let's allocate that money somewhere else. Let's fire these motherfuckers and bring in some real people. Because this doesn't happen in other countries. Other countries, even other states, they don't have what we have here in California. It's like a rare fucking thing that happens here in California. Okay? You have to look at it this way. If true that these groups are really operating the way they do, then the law enforcement in those respected areas should be the laughing stock of all law enforcement across the nation. I know if I lived in another state and we didn't have prison gangs because we were able to control all that shit, I would be fucking laughing and mocking California prison staff and authorities at any conventions or seminars that I run into them. Or definitely when we fucking run into a bar after these seminars and conventions, I'm going to be fucking clowning on them, bro. Just like a fucking Raider fan would do a San Francisco 49er or a fucking Charger fan to a Raider fan. I would be doing the same thing. Like, what the fuck? You guys are fucking sitting on your ass, not doing your job, or what? These guys are able to function like that? But anyways, like I said, I am not going to disagree. I think they're doing a good job. I just think they're doing a horrible job of how they come across and tell us. They should tell us the truth, that these dudes are broke, that they don't have no money, that in fact, they were sent to the SHU not for committing a crime, but strictly for their political beliefs and ideologies. What I have a bone to pick, or what I think is so hilarious in this fucking narcissistic psychopath interview, is the fact that within three to 4 minutes of him ranting off of how wonderful a job law enforcement is doing, he does a completely 360 and starts talking about how the Mexican mafia is taxing street gangs and drug operations throughout Southern California and the nation without being any interference from law enforcement. How they're generating millions of dollars annually, currently, through their network of sureños on the streets who commit crimes and for benefit and send up the money to them in prison, right? He goes off to say how these dudes are functioning and how they're just generating millions of dollars without a problem. So which is it? Is law enforcement doing a fucking great job at combating them? Because if they were, then that seems like they would have a difficult time at generating money, if any money at all, and that at every attempt to commit some sort of criminal activity, law enforcement would be there to thaw that operation. But yet, like I told you, immediately after talking about how law enforcement has basically crippled them and basically running his group through the mud, he turned around and talks about how they're generating money and fucking money's just fucking falling out of the sky in their prison cells and how their pillows are full of money and how they have multi-million dollars in their fucking inmate accounts, right? Who the IRS and FBI's financial analyst team can never seem to find. But yet, we can find terrorists, right? And drug cartels money who use highly sophisticated networks to launder their money. But we can't find a simple money order and prepaid credit card laundering operation that allegedly these individuals run off of. Fuck it. It's not rocket science like Rene Boxer Enriquez says. Now, anyways, that is what I thought of his interview. I thought in his interview he did nothing more than expose himself to be the cholo Michael Lynn Thompson with cholo tattoos and 3 flowers. This Hollywood-like celebrity, narcissistic, psychopath, rapist is nothing more than a delusional liar, right? Just like Michael Lynn Thompson. He's a walking, talking contradiction of himself who will say anything to make himself sound intellectually smart when he's really nothing more than a highly sophisticated, habitual liar, manipulator, and con man, just like Michael Lynn Thompson. So that's why I pose to you, YouTube renegades, do you think Rene Boxer Enriquez is the Michael Lynn Thompson of the barrio? Is he the Cholo Michael Lynn Thompson? Because of the delusional fantasies this guy likes to tell people. But the most sickest, most disturbing part of this whole tragic comedy, right, which is called the prison genre, is the fact that law enforcement and mainstream media are helping to sell the illusion that this narcissistic psychopath registered rapist is some goody-goody reformed convict, right? When he's really nothing more than a highly sophisticated, manipulated con man. And that's really the most sickest part of this all, that he's being sold by law enforcement and the mainstream media as some sort of savior to the youth, some sort of youth mentor, when this guy has a history of, as a youth, being a sexual predator to young people. Disgusting. He's disgusting. And it's disgusting how people in the comment section speak highly of him. That goes to show you how fucked up society is. That they can't see through the bullshit like your boy the Outlaw and see that Rene, the registered rapist Enriquez, is a hypocrite, contradicts himself, and will do and say anything to manipulate you. But I don't want to keep ranting off, YouTube renegades. Like I said in the beginning, do you think Rene, celebrity rapist, Boxer Enriquez, is the modern day Chicano Michael Lynn Thompson? Did he expose himself as a fraud and a manipulator in his most recent interview, in which, like I pointed out, he completely contradicted himself in his entire interview, right? An hour-long interview that was designed to subconsciously glorify a psychopath, narcissistic, registered rapist, right? That failed to call him out, right? To be a non-biased, hard-hitting journalist and call him out and ask him about his previous charges of being a sexual predator. Now I ask you, YouTube renegades, do you think if this journalist was interviewing an individual who was associated with the end to hostilities, the peace treaty, and the hunger strikes, and there was allegations, right, or rumors of some sort of sexual activity, right, do you think that journalist would have hesitated to bring that up, right? No, he would have brought that up so he can do a character assassination, right? Just like the snitch influencer community always bring up the bogus allegations of Johnny Martinez, which have been proven in court to be false. Specifically, the CO who allegedly made those allegations against them testified in court that she was forced to fabricate those allegations against Johnny Martinez. But I just want to point out that this hour-long video was designed to glamorize this fucking narcissistic psychopath rapist and designed to hide and cover up his sexual predatory behavior that he's known for. So I want to know in the comments, this thing's about to be an hour long, so I want to know in the comments, do you agree with me that this guy is nothing more than a fucking narcissistic psychopath registered rapist, right? A comic book cholo narcissistic psychopath, a registered rapist. He's not a sophisticated, intellectually well-spoken and well-groomed. Or actually, he is well-spoken and well-groomed like Michael N. Thompson. And I'll tell you why. Because law enforcement has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars grooming these individuals with speech classes, probably some sort of mild acting classes. How to walk, how to talk, how to dress, how to groom, everything. So these individuals could be walking, talking, real life, human PR puppets for law enforcement and prison authorities. I encourage each one of you individuals to learn about the rise of Hollywood celebrities and how the movie studio moguls, the first original movie studio moguls, felt about the status of a celebrity. One comment made by one famous MGM Grand movie mogul was that a celebrity isn't born, a celebrity is created. That the movie studios spend thousands of dollars giving them acting classes, teaching them how to walk, how to talk, how to speak, how to sit, how to eat, how to smile, everything. So in that way, they can go on screen and sell whatever delusional idea Hollywood wants to sell free society. But I will ask you this question one last time before I throw my outro. Do you think Rene Boxer Enriquez exposed himself in his recent interview to be the modern-day Mexican Michael Lynn Thompson? See, YouTube renegades, it's individuals like Michael Lynn Thompson and registered rapist Boxer Enriquez that we must always be aware of and always be wearing our critical thinking beanies on, because we not only have to decipher and read between the lines of their bullshit contradicting statements or delusional statements like Michael Lynn Thompson, but we also have to be aware that mainstream media, who's cooperating with law enforcement, is working hand in hand to manipulate us by scripting the content and slanting the narrative in order to sell us these delusional, narcissistic psychopaths as righteous individuals who are worthy of being admired by free society, when they should be shamed and stoned by free society, right? Individuals like Rene Boxer Enriquez should be castrated, right? And any of you who disagree with me, well then you know what? I hope the next time this guy sexually assaults a woman, I hope it's one of you guys that disagree with me in the comments. Female friend, wife, sister, mother, granddaughter, cousin that's harmed by the sexual predator. And then come back and leave a comment telling me what a wonderful job, what a wonderful guy this fucking narcissistic psychopath, registered rapist Rene Boxer Enriquez is. But I encourage each one of you YouTube renegades to always fucking remain 113 and 114% fully fucking activated and strapped with your critical thinking beanies on at all times. Because there indeed is a war out for our minds. And there will always be some new narcissistic psychopath, right? It's going to come on and is going to be promoted by mainstream media and law enforcement as the new Michael Lynn Thompson or the new Boxer Enriquez. And they too will have a shady past, right? They too will most likely be some sort of sick, nasty, narcissistic psychopath who has a past of being a sexual predator or a delusional fucking prison hippie guru, right? That's lost touch with all reality. So, with that said, YouTube renegades, make sure you hit the like, the notification, and if you ain't scared to be an outlaw renegade, hit the motherfucking sub button. And with that said, a clenched fist salute y venceremos.